travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. As The Money Show comes to air tonight, the presidency issuing a statement in response to the DA's claim that Mcebisi Jonas has been denied accreditation by Washington to act as a special envoy with relation to trade from President Cyril Ramaphosa. I've seen many presidential statements in my time. This is, I would say, of the scathing variety. The presidency cautioning South Africa against treating DA disinformation of matters of international relations and diplomacy as official government policy. They talk about the DA's latest effort to embarrass President Ramaphosa's special envoy to North America involves claims that that the US has rejected his credentials. They talk about sensationalism. However, the presidency also saying the facts around this matter include the reality that special envoys do not present diplomatic credentials to host countries in the way designated heads of mission or other diplomats are. You'll know the backstory to all of this, of course. The Democratic Alliance releasing a statement this afternoon in the name of Emma Powell, their foreign affairs spokesperson. She is unfortunately unable to talk to us right now. We're hoping in the next half an hour or so she'll become available. Otherwise, we've been told after 7 o'clock. But the claim from the DA is that Jonas has been denied permission to represent South Africa in terms of entering the United States. Jonas, as you know, made comments against President Donald Trump long before he was appointed envoy. In a way, comments quite similar to Ibrahim Rasool did before he became an ambassador and was eventually, of course, kicked out by the United States. There are many different moving parts to all of this. Let's start your coverage tonight with the spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Crispin Peary. Crispin, good evening to you. I do appreciate the time. Firstly, did the US tell Mcebisi Jonas or someone else he was not welcome and would not be accepted as an envoy? All right, Crispin Peary, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm not sure where actually you are in the world at the moment. Sounds like you're there now, Crispin. Let me put the question again. Did the US tell Mcebisi Jonas or someone else he would not be acceptable as an envoy?
They're a messenger of the president. They aid the president in whatever message that the president wants to present to the country. And it is common cause to everyone that President Ramaphosa has not yet sent Mr. Mcebisi Jonas to the United States on any diplomatic mission as yet. Although he has appointed him as his special envoy, he's not been officially given the duty to go and present any type of message to the United States. So the point of credentials doesn't even arise, Stephen, because at no point does a special envoy present credentials. And we would have thought that someone of Emma Powell's stature, someone who engages in international relations on a daily basis, would know this. The only people who are required to present credentials are foreign representatives in the form of an ambassador who would then be required to present the credentials to a head of state. That's the context in which credentials get presented. So it's really a strange statement that we're seeing from the DA. But the second element, Stephen, that I quickly want to address, this comes at a critical time when we do have tariffs against us. That is true. But the DTIC is firmly engaged with that process. But also we mustn't exceptionalize what we are seeing happening to South Africa. Just up north from the United States, Canada has just been slapped with a 35% tariff. In Europe as well, we are seeing them being slapped with 30% tariffs. So this idea that South Africa is being singled out for special treatment, therefore, really needs to be addressed in totality.
So, I mean, of course, I accept that, and we might have missed the first part of your answer, Crispin. I do just need to clear this up very quickly. I accept also what you say, that Mcebisi Jonas has not been to the US and has not been sent there. Has anyone in Washington told government he would not be acceptable as a representative?
Not that I'm aware of, Stephen. That's something that I'm used to. And And it would arise in the context of us having to send him there. That is when that engagement would arise. But outside engagement, don't see how that would arise at all.
Okay. Why has the president made him a special envoy to North America and not sent him to North America?
Well, actually, he did go to North America. He was part of the G7 delegation to Canada, and we did have several engagements with our Canadian counterparts, with Mr. Percy Jonas there as well. So he has been sent to North America, quite frankly. And as I understand it, from the presidency point of view, is that we are seeing a situation where how the U.S. administration is engaging with its own neighbors and partners is of interest to us, so that we can further understand how to engage the U.S. So that is why Mr. Jonas has been designated as a special envoy to North America, and I think there's good merit in that.
Okay, and I'm sorry to come back to this, but I feel I must. Is Mcebisi Jonas avoiding going to the United States, and is the president avoiding sending him to the United States because you're worried that he might be kicked out in the same way that Ebrahim Rasool was for saying sort of the same thing?
Let's sequence this properly, Stephen. You may recall that at the time at which Mr. Jonas was appointed, especially an envoy for the United States, was when we had the fallout with the ambassador. Subsequent to that, the president himself went to the United States and presented the country, and that engagement is now possible at a head of state level. So one can argue that that's why the president has broadened the mandate for North America, because he has the ability to engage directly with the United States. At the time it was presented, we need engagement through a special envoy to de-escalate what was becoming, a protracted discussion between us and the United States. But we now have that direct line to the head of state and our Foreign Services Department. So that engagement is possible. So the mandate of Mr. Jonas has then since been widened. So the urgent need to send Mr. Jonas to the United States doesn't arise anymore. And that is why Minister Pakistan, for example, is firmly engaged with the issues around the tariffs. And we will continue with the President and Foreign Affairs around the political issues as they arise. If there's a need for Mr. Jonas to go to the United States, that matter would then be looked at as well.
Crispin Perry, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions tonight. Thank you. Spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation on The Money Show this evening. Listening to that, the political and governance analyst Sandile Swana. Sandile, it seems there's nothing that our coalition partners won't argue about, including trade and relationships with the US. How do you read all of this?
Thank you so much, Stephen. The situation here is that South Africa needs something quite concrete, which is an agreement with the U.S. on specific tariffs, for instance, on citrus, which affects the Western Cape and the Northern Cape, that there must be a deal. And I've just been reading the comments from the industry association specifically on the citrus. And they do have a strategy, and there's ongoing deliberations. So the people who are in charge of those trade negotiations, which affect the bread and butter of South Africans, are actually at work doing the job. Pakstow and John Steenhuisen are actually in charge of that. The wild speculations around this, which also is touched on in the last paragraph of the statement from the Citrus Association, whatever they call themselves, is that there is a problem with the ICJ Israel type thing. And there are South Africans who are involved in that lobby that we should maybe join if you want to put it that way, the Make America Great movement. And I would put Powell in that category. Because in terms of the actual strictly tariff negotiations, South Africans are in the same boat as many other major nations, and we have in certain categories very good bargaining points, and those bargaining points must not be just dropped and ignored. We should bargain, and there is an extension on the negotiations. So I think the DA is trying to win the South African right wing to its side, sometimes in irresponsible ways. I'll put it that way. Thank you.
The other point is, does it matter? I don't know if there's any South African who could represent the current South African government as it is constituted, representing primarily the ANC, yes, the DA, but also the PAC and the other parties of the coalition, who would be acceptable to the Trump administration. I mean, you can go all the way back to Nelson Mandela's appearance on the Ted Koppel show in 1990 when he specifically said very clearly, we will never abandon the Palestinian people. He was speaking for the ANC when he said that. I mean, that's a fundamental fact of history that is not going to change. I mean, does it matter that we don't have a special envoy there at all?
No, it doesn't. Not at all. Because fortunately, the officials and the ministers, like Minister of Trade, Minister of Agriculture, are actually doing the job. So the envoy is, in essence, and I agree with Crispin Peary here, that the envoy specifically targeting the U.S. is superfluous. We have specific political problems around the Palestinian question with the USA, and there are people who've chosen sides. I mean, like now we're creating a Cold War inside South Africa, by the way, by doing all of these things that we're doing. People in Canada and some of the states in Canada are on the throat of the USA. I mean, the fight is heavy between the Canadians and the Americans. But most of us have always looked at Canada as a very cordial country. But Trump has gone for them. So I agree with you that even if we're Canadian, I think it is not an easy thing to do business with Trump. I don't think it's easy. And if you are going to argue long-standing political questions and long political philosophies with Trump, you're not going to get anywhere. And that is where we are. But on the other side, I mean, I read some of our arguments straight from industry, not from politicians. Some of our arguments are actually quite good. Good arguments. As an example, our season for fruit, as a citrus fruit, is different from theirs. Therefore, we don't even compete. 77% of our goods, the Americans can buy without any tariffs, etc., etc. So Trump is bargaining things that, to a certain degree are problematic. And the DA, specifically Powell, I don't think Steenhuisen is busy with this, but Powell is busy with this, I don't know. But Steenhuisen is focused on these issues that I'm talking about. And then, there are quotations directly from Steenhuisen about strategies here.
Sandile Swana, I really appreciate the time tonight. Thank you. The political analyst, just a voice in my ear telling me a moment ago that we do have confirmation. Emma Powell, the person who started all of this with her statement on behalf of the DA, will be on your radio in 20 minutes' time at around 20 to 7.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, you'll recall the statement yesterday from ArcelorMittal that they can and will continue to trade until the end of September, but current conditions mean they can't trade after that. They've already been given money by government to pay salaries. ArcelorMittal pointing out again yesterday its electricity costs are too high. Government policy is helping mini mills that create steel from scrap metal in competition. And Transnet has provided very bad services. Dr. Saul Levin is the Executive Director of Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies. TIPS. Saul, good evening. If what ArcelorMittal says is true, and it surely must be, then it's probably impossible for anyone to function under those conditions.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that are hitting a lot of energy-intensive industries and transport-intensive industries. So the electricity price has hit several industries. So we look at also at the ferrochrome producers. They've been struggling with electricity price and reliability and the high cost of transport. So those issues have affected several industries, and even smaller players are feeling that. Electricity price is too high and has grown exponentially over the last couple of years. There are other issues, though, at play. The company hasn't been doing well for over a decade. They've run at losses almost every year except for 3 over the last 12 years. So they haven't been. They've hit a lot of stumbling blocks, and this is just the latest in a series of crises, and it particularly affects the Newcastle operation, which does drag things down a lot for them. With that particular plant finding it very difficult to compete with the smaller players in the market.
So I think what ArcelorMittal, it seemed to me, was trying to do was sort of put the ball in government's court to say, there needs to be action from government. And what action can government really take? I mean, even government can't pay all of Eskom's bills.
I mean, the government did give them, that credit facility or that facility. I'm not sure it will be credit if they aren't able to repay it because they're running at a loss. But the situation means, I mean, the government, as we well know, is being asked to bail out lots of different players across the economy, and there's only so much that they would be able to contribute towards bailing out AMSA again. And if things haven't been able to be turned around over this 6-month period, and it seems not, then it does look very bleak for that Newcastle operation.
Has government policy made the situation worse? I'm not talking about electricity prices or Transnet. That sort of wasn't policy, kind of. But I'm talking about mini mills which are competing with ArcelorMittal. Is that a major problem?
So I mean, it's complicated because it's given new players an entry into the market. The mini mills have lower cost structures. So part of the advantage of being a mini mill is you have smaller operations, you use different technology, you're less energy intensive because you're using a lot of scrap metal, which has a lower melting point. So you have advantages in being able to use scrap metal. And the price advantage on reducing the scrap metal price and keeping it in the country is a approach that many countries have taken because scrap metal is it's expensive to make metal, and to use the waste or to export it to other countries is not the best environmental option, and you're wasting your electricity that you've given in. So those mini mills have a lower cost structure, and they are able to outcompete AMSA on particular products. We're talking specifically on long steel, that they're able to outcompete AMSA. But there are certain things, because of their production process and because of their input materials, they haven't been able to get into what we call speciality steels. And this is where some of the country challenges come in, that certain industries require those speciality steels. The mini mills could, but AMSA is already producing in that space. If AMSA Newcastle were to go into liquidation or close down that plant, then there would be a gap. It could be replaced by imports. It could be replaced by mini mills upgrading their operations to become more sophisticated. But the net result is, on the back of lower demand for steel, that there is too much steel available in the country, plus there's imports. So by way of example, we've done some analysis on steel intensity. We at the level of steel intensity as we were in South Africa in the 1970s. We're using other products. Steel is used less for a whole lot of things.
If ArcelorMittal were to close, now obviously there would be an awful economic impact in Newcastle. People and their families would lose income. Would it matter to the overall economy as a whole?
If we can, so there's trade-offs. If in any industry, if one player closes, those that survive will do better. So it's never nice to see a big major South African operation that's had a long history in this country, as it was in Isco, closed down, and it will be devastating for those families. But there are other players who will step into that place. It would be a disaster if we had to import a lot more of our steel, or we just couldn't make the products in the country anymore and had to import finished products. That would have a bigger knock-on impact. But there's a trade-off. The country just can't afford to keep, paying 1.5 billion every 6 months to keep that Newcastle plant open. But if there were resources to put into, the workers getting opportunities to maybe start smaller businesses or go into other operations or other industries being attracted to Newcastle, it could and should be done to try and mitigate some of the worst outcomes for individuals.
Dr. Saul Levin, really appreciate the thoughts. Thank you. Executive Director of Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, TIPS.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Kwena Maloko is from Equity Research Sales at Absa CIB. Kwena, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in tonight. Lots on the boil, not all of it related to markets, of course. NVIDIA saying last night that it was allowed to sell some AI chips to China. The American government had tried to regulate that quite closely. That's had quite an impact on NVIDIA today.
That's right, Stephen. I mean, when this happened, it was in the middle of sort of the US-China trade negotiations and that meltdown. So that news overnight was quite positive for the entire sort of tech space. You'll see on our side, Naspers process up just off of Tencent being up 3%. And the reason that is that firstly, even though if you look through all the results, you've seen this momentum building in their operations in terms of productivity gains from the AI that they're developing, but they're using the old chips as well. So investors now looking ahead and saying, well, there's a potential now for continued operational momentum in Tencent that should definitely flow through into Naspers and Prosus. But I think a more global take on that would be that potentially, at least in the short term, the US-China relations are probably in a slightly better place than they were in the beginning of the year.
Well, that would be good news for China. I mean, they had second quarter GDP figures out today. Their growth was not as slow as was expected, and this takes us straight to resilience around tariffs.
Exactly. The export numbers in particular were stronger than what one would have expected. But there was the narrative out there that China will find a place to place its exports, at least in the short term. But I think globally, this wasn't a result that would make you substantially upgrade your expectations for China GDP for the rest of the year. So the concerns around global growth, especially emerging market growth from China, still remain. This was just a temporary relief, I think. But what you'll see is none of the emerging market currencies jumped quite a bit, right? Everything is still very dependent on what Donald Trump has to say about tariffs. And now the go-live date is the 1st of August. So until then, I think most of your headlines will drive your returns, especially in the FX.
I don't know what it is about that guy on Fridays, but he seems to like to make news there. We've got earnings season starting next week that'll probably drive US markets and ours to an extent. But tariffs is still the kind of story,
yes,
even though we have absolutely no clue what's going to happen. And I keep making this point that, yes, we got our tariff letter. It made no mention of our political views or stances at all, and didn't with other countries either, except for Brazil, of course.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even within the US earnings season, people have kept their earnings expectations high, but the question is always going to be on the outlook, right? What is going to happen? A thing that the US companies did is they stockpiled all their products, but they're running through those stockpiles. So you have to now order in at the higher tariffs. For us, I mean, it's just about the uncertainty going.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, our earnings season kicks off with the miners as well. That's another big sector that's impacted by tariffs. And again, the outlooks of the companies become much more important, which could then add a little bit to volatility, especially in equities.
Kwena Maloko, thanks so much for coming in. Equity Research Sales at Absa CIB. You with the Money Show just gone 6:30. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, 17 minutes now to 7 the time. Good to hear from you tonight on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702. Well, as you heard around 40 minutes ago as we came to air, that strongly worded statement from the presidency tonight accusing the DA of disinformation for claiming in a statement this afternoon that the president's special envoy to the US, or now to North America, Jonas, had been denied permission by Washington to represent South Africa there. The DA says he was denied accreditation. The presidency says that's not true. You heard the international relations spokesperson Crispin Perry half an hour ago saying on the record it is not true that Jonas has been denied accreditation and that he had not been able to present any accreditation to the US or any credential because he hasn't been there yet. Jonas also previously making statements critical of the US President Donald Trump, statements sort of quite similar in a way to what our previous ambassador Ibrahim Rasool had said before he was expelled. Emma Powell is the DA spokesperson on international relations and cooperation. It was her statement this afternoon that started all of this. Emma, good evening to you. What information do you base your claim on?
Hi, thanks for having me. So yesterday marked 90 days since Sabisi Jonas was appointed as Ramaphosa's special envoy to the United States. And we asked what he had achieved, and we said that we were going to, in absence of information from the presidency, be submitting a promotion for Access to Information Act request, compelling the presidency to provide details of all engagements, achievements, outcomes, and travel to the United States. Now, in response to that statement, this morning I received information directly from senior sources in the U.S. administration in Washington in response to that statement, noting that in May, the U.S. administration had in fact denied Mcebisi Jonas a diplomatic visa, that they had also formally rejected his request for credentialing, and that they had informed on multiple occasions our government, the presidency, various ANC officials that the US would not recognize Jonas as South Africa's official interlocutor, and that the administration had explicitly advised that Jonas was not acceptable to Washington, and South Africa and the president had been urged to appoint an alternative envoy. Now, the question is, if Mcebisi Jonas is indeed our head of state's special envoy, then he would require diplomatic visas and certain state-level credentials in order to enter into official negotiations and talks. What we know is that he has been denied these, and so I find it disingenuous that the presidency has issued such a strongly worded statement when they are still, to date, unable to take the nation into their confidence and tell us what Mr. Jonas has achieved for South Africa in regards to resolving some of the tariff, the looming Liberation Day tariff issues, as well as the non-tariff barriers, which would, of course, be the issues that have been raised by the Trump administration since February this year.
I'm going to come back to the trade stuff in just a moment. So you're saying your information is based from a senior source in the Trump administration?
More than one source, yes.
Okay. Why would they tell you this?
Well, as you know, the US has grown increasingly frustrated that they do not have a credible, official, and acceptable state-level interlocutor with which to enter into negotiations. We know that Ambassador Rasool was unceremoniously demarched and expelled, and since then the president appointed this special envoy to the United States, but by the presidency's own admission, the special envoy has not in fact traveled or entered into any formal state-to-state level negotiations. The DA keeps its communication channels with Washington, D.C. open. We've invested significantly over the last 18 months in building relationships at the White House, National Security Council, and at Congress. So we talk. The ultimate objective is, of course, not to harm the bilateral relationship, but rather to find a pathway to repair the trust that's been broken and to decrease tensions. Now, it seems to me that if the president was serious about avoiding the looming Liberation Day tariffs and striking a deal, he would be very clear on the specific mandate of his special envoy, who works on behalf of his government, and bring the nation into his confidence in terms of what the negotiating parameters are and what the outcome of those negotiations are as we head into this very difficult 1st of August period. The point is that the presidency has continued to maintain, including in a tweet from the presidency spokesperson to Vincent Magwenya last night in response to my statement asking for that information, that by even asking these questions, the DA is, and I quote, encroaching on the president's mandate and ambit, and the president does not owe anybody answers.
Okay, be that as it may, one of the consistent points that comes out from the DIRCO spokesperson, Crispin Piri, from the presidency statement, is that, how do I put this politely, that it's not really the business of the DA to do this. In fact, they go further and suggest that you're sort of, working against South Africa's interests by maintaining these communication links. Now, I don't think anyone can say to you, you can't talk to people. Of course you can. Is it really in the national interest for an opposition party to do that? I mean, if you were the leading party in government, or say opposition party, you're in a difficult coalition. But if you were the political party that had both the president and the DIRCO minister, wouldn't you be irritated if the ANC was meeting people in the Trump administration?
Well, let's go back to the statement of intent. The ANC didn't have the votes in Parliament to elect Cyril Ramaphosa as the president. So after the signing of the statement of intent, it was agreed that the DA would support voting Mr. Ramaphosa into the position of president. And that was underpinned by a statement of intent. One of the founding provisions of that statement was that there would be no departmentally sealed mandates and that all decisions and policy trajectories would be concluded on the basis of what they called sufficient consensus. So 60% of the partners in government having consensus. Now, as you know, during those negotiations where the DA was given 6 full ministries, we were not given any of the portfolios on what we call the security cluster. So that would be defense, state security, foreign relations, or any of the ministries in the presidency. And the objective there was that the ANC could continue to pretend that they had an outright majority and to run South Africa's foreign policy trajectory on the basis of their liberation era fraternal allegiances. In the absence of the ANC being able to provide any tangible outcomes of de-escalation pathways or negotiations and agreements with the US, the DA stepped into that vacuum. It's no secret that the DA has been engaging in Washington, D.C. in South Africa's interests, contrary to the presidency's statement where he accuses us of aligning with right-wing forces. We did the very opposite. When Andrew and I were in Washington, D.C. Earlier this year, in the 3 previous trips that I did, we waved South Africa's flag high. DIRCO knew about our trips. We were talking to them while we were there. In fact, I met Ambassador Rasool in the basement of Congress to update him on discussions that I had been having. We certainly did not perpetuate or peddle any of the right-wing narratives around certain segments of our population being under attack. We were there to find out what the US would consider to be a pathway towards de-escalation and what was required on the part of our government to mend relationships. So it's disingenuous. The point is that instead of acting with pragmatism, the presidency is putting their pride ahead of the national interest. Now, what South Africa needs is we need a suitably qualified, capable, and reputable interlocutor, negotiator, ideally in the form of an ambassador. And in the absence of that, we need a special envoy to the US that is actually able to travel to the US, who's got official documentation, who's accepted by Washington, who's welcomed in Washington. And it seems to me that I have no problem with Mr. Jonas, but it seems to me that his appointment would be better suited as an advisor to the presidency rather than a special envoy. Okay. The point is nothing is being done to resolve these issues.
Okay, so I accept some of that, but I do need to come to a bigger point, and there are issues around Mcebisi Jonas which may need an explanation on your version from what you say, and particularly if you say the presidency knew something or the president knew a fact and didn't share it with the rest of us, that may be problematic. I mean, time will tell us which of these versions is correct. I do need to put another question to you because you keep coming back to the same thing about trying to resolve the trade tension with Washington. Now, I completely agree that needs to be one of government's uppermost priorities at this moment. I'm not convinced that there is any South African who could I mean, it's bizarre to me that we have to discuss the identities of South Africans who would be acceptable to the Trump administration. That's problematic for a start. I'm not entirely convinced there's any South African, outside of maybe a few who I suppose mostly look like me, perhaps on the right wing and perhaps play better golf than I do, who would be acceptable to President Trump. I mean, we need to be blunt here. I'm also not convinced that it entirely matters, because if you look at his letter that he sent to us, which was a copy and paste with just a different percentage to most of the other countries, he didn't tie politics at all to his trade decisions. This is Trump's trade narrative. Nothing seems to change him from that. And we could be as good a negotiator or as clever a person as Mark Carney, but it's not going to change it. My point is, I'm not sure it matters whether we have a special envoy there or not.
So I hear your concerns around identity politics, but let me assure you that the issue of Mr. Jonas, as was the case with Ambassador Rasool, is not about identity politics. It's about previous remarks that have been made that have been deeply insulting, in which accusations have been made about President Donald Trump, regardless of what one's subjective opinion on those statements is. They have indeed offended the President of the United States. Secondly, there's a bigger problem at play here in regards to Mr. Jonas, and this is not to cast any aspersions because these matters are being litigated before the courts. But Mr. Jonas is currently the chairperson of the MTN Group. Now, the MTN Group is currently defending numerous sets of litigation in the United States that allege that MTN violated U.S. anti-terrorism laws by engaging in a number of different sets of business transactions. One of them relates to Afghanistan and the Taliban, and another one of those relates to the Iran-Turkcell deal and sanctioned entities that were involved, as well as bribes and corruption that have been alleged at the time. So we have not been informed by the individuals that have provided us with this information from the U.S. administration in D.C. as to whether or not it was previous remarks or a conflict of interest. They haven't given us the reason that the diplomatic visa was declined, or that the credentials were declined, or that they've told the presidency that they will not officially accept engagements with Mr. Jonas. But I don't believe that it comes down to identity politics or one's ability to play golf. To your second point, we have seen very successfully that a number of countries who've been hit with these Liberation Day tariffs have hit the ground running. They've taken it seriously, they've entered into negotiations, and they've now been able to strike deals. It's not impossible. We know that it just requires urgency, pragmatism, and offering the US a good deal. What the US have been very clear with South Africa is about that they want competitive deals, equally competitive deals to the deals that we get from other countries, and they've specifically stated the European Union and countries such as China. And there are a number of trade irritants that the US need resolved. So whilst I hear and I accept your playing devil's advocate in terms of, is this about identity? This specific issue is not about identity. The bottom line is that South Africa is a middle power. We have got everything to play for and everything to lose. We could potentially see the collapse of our automotive sector if the 25% tariffs come into effect. We're already seeing serious concerning signals coming out of the Eastern Cape from certain car manufacturers that I won't mention. And then in the Western Cape, where the DA governs, of course, agriculture's on the line, our citrus exports, our wine exports, and we need skilled negotiators who are acceptable to the United States. So, I act in South Africa's best interests, but unfortunately, 2 weeks out from the 1st of August, the presidency is refusing to provide any details or updates. We're unable to get updates from DTIC, and the fact of the matter is that I don't think that anything of tangible, significant impact is being done in the background to stave off this looming economic catastrophe.
Emma Powell, thank you, the DA spokesperson on international relations and cooperation. All right, well, you've heard her version of events, quite a lot there to look at. She says that this information came to her from sources within the Trump administration, won't give us more than that. You heard earlier from Crispin Piri, the spokesperson. Over the years, you've heard me ask wealth manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts. Spokesperson for the Department of International Relations and Cooperation saying that it is not true. Very clear, he says, that this is not true. Your view on this, 011 8830 702 021 446 0567.
The Money.
Over the years, you've heard me ask Wealth Manager Warren Ingram the big questions. How do we invest wisely? How do we protect our family's future? All those conversations, that entire library of financial expertise is now available as a podcast. Straightforward advice to help you build your wealth on demand. Just search for Warren Ingram's Personal Finance wherever you get your podcasts.
Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, of course, a lot of our first hour, or pretty much all of it, been taken up by that conversation around the United States, around Mcebisi Jonas. I suspect it's going to be a little while before we really know where the truth lies. It's not often you get one person in politics saying, specifically X, Y, Z, and the other saying categorically X, Y, Z is not true. I mean, usually people sort of play around with words in these moments, but in this case, it does seem that that is the case. Two very different versions sort of being put to us this evening. I think there will be more conversations and more public debate to come. There are legitimate questions to ask about a party that is not the holder of the position of international relations and cooperation, speaking to other countries. But how can you say to a South African, you can't go and talk to politicians somewhere else? It would be nonsensical to say that. So there are lots of different ways in which you can understand this. I keep coming back to the point, though. Can anyone change the mind of the person in the White House when it comes to tariffs? You're with The Money Show at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Coming up in the next few moments, we'll discuss beef prices, move away from the politicians, and talk about beef prices. And of course, in light of the foot and mouth outbreak, you'd expect there'll be a spike in beef prices. And in beef carcasses, there was. That seems to have come down. Rutendo Hundwingwi, he's already here with your Africa update. We'll go through some of the big business stories on our continent. And personal finance this evening. Warren Ingram is away. We'll be speaking to Thabo Holo now from the Old Mutual Financial Education, particularly around online gambling. And this is one of the big changes in financial behavior that we've seen around online gambling. In some ways, really quite scary how much money is going into online gambling at the moment. And the fact that really, over time, the odds are against you. And some people, it seems, are gambling really motivated by a desire to get out of debt, which scares me big time. We'll talk more about that. Online gambling is becoming a big, big thing. Good to hear from you this evening. 011 8830 702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Well, while all of the other political noise was going on around Mcebisi Jonas, a confirmation from the Transport Minister, Barbara Creasy, that the board of the Road Accident Fund has now been fired or dissolved, pick a word. Relieved from their duty seems to be in vogue this week. And it follows, of course, the board's decision to put Collins Leswalo on suspension or special leave. Again, pick your choice. He's sort of fought that so far as I know. He hasn't had any success in that. But we can keep messing around with the politics and the internal goings-on in the Road Accident Fund. A couple of things stand out for me. The one is there's a large amount of money involved here. The second, and we spoke to the minister about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, the current model is just not working. It is tied up in courts. I mean, I've sat in a courtroom and watched advocate after advocate come to represent a case against the fund. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Where I'm really going with all of this is that the structure needs to be changed. Now, the minister agrees, and there'll be a sort of no-fault system. There'll be a sort of standardized rate for what you get paid out. So it won't pay you out for future earnings, which led to some quite insane payments to foreign tourists and things like that. And hopefully it won't be based so much on which lawyer you get to represent you. I do think, though, that there's a need for urgency. So if the board has been dissolved, now we need to get a new board. They need to deal with the Collins Swallow situation very quickly and change the structure. And this should not get tied up in coalition debates or arguments or just general politics. It needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly. And people who are in accidents, if there is a legal way for them to be compensated, must be compensated. And that really is what needs to happen. Do you think it will? I'm not holding my breath.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, the Red Meat Producers Organisation confirming the price of beef carcasses is starting to moderate. Prices did spike after the outbreak of foot and mouth disease. Now it seems those prices are coming down. Thabile Nkunjana is an agricultural economist. Thabile, good evening. I mean, I remember the moment when it was confirmed there was a foot and mouth outbreak in Gauteng, and I presume it's almost normal in agricultural economics for that to push meat prices up quite sharply.
Yeah, certainly, Stephen. Good evening, and the listeners. Yeah, so that is quite correct, because I remember that, when it comes to meat, as much as it is an issue for other agricultural products, the issue of supply and demand is always a key driver there. Once we have an issue where we don't really have enough that you're getting into the market, then we're always going to see these things. But this is something that we anticipated once we saw those outbreaks, which we are actually following another issue where, remember earlier on, we had a problem with the feed prices. That was quite a big problem as we were coming from the previous season because of the drought that impacted the production of it. So once we were going to that, before we actually even began to recover to that, we had these outbreaks, with the mouth disease. And another issue was another outbreak in Brazil for the avian influenza, which also again affected our supply of meat in general, because meat prices across, they tend to be moving towards the same direction, depending on which product is more affordable, and consumers tend to go for those that are more affordable for them.
Can you see when a spike starts and then the foot and mouth outbreak sort of is over? It doesn't end as quickly as it is declared, of course. It ends in a slower way. Is there a sort of classical kind of shape on the graph? It goes up quickly and then comes down over a certain period?
Yeah, because that again, it is determined by a number of factors, Stephen, including the fact that, as I was trying to explain, that once, the consumers see that amongst the products, that remember that meat prices, depend on the cuts and all that. So for the consumers now, if they see that there is more of affordability in, for instance, normally, Class C, they will flood into that. Also, given the fact that you also tend to have quite an economic issues in South Africa, that determines this again. Now there's going to be an influx of consumers buying more of that. That automatically is going to drive up prices, which is something that we have seen. And then that, of course, again, it depends on how much of a balance you're going to have to other meats, be it we are having an availability of poultry to other side, with which we had issues again because of the slot of the supply that we have restricted from the poultry that are coming from Brazil. So it does not really have a time span. It depends on how much the consumers depend, be it spending buying of specific products, and then you're going to typically see that spike immediately. But that again is normally not the same across the products. If you are to look across the meat types, and some they will increase sharply, given the fact that consumers are flooding to buy that. But then for others, especially those that tend to be expensive, you normally don't see a spike in that. But then again, that is going to be determined by the supply and demand of those products that consumers are buying at that time.
This happened at a Karen feedlot in Gauteng. We don't often have foot and mouth in Gauteng. It's not as often as you would in the Eastern Cape or Limpopo. Yeah. Was that a major factor in how prices responded? Gauteng, Central Province, Karen, as I understand it, quite a big feedlot.
Yeah, that was a big factor, Stephen. Remember that in South Africa, about 70% of the beef that we are to consume that is supplied across the country, it is coming from the feedlot system. And then when a bigger supplier of the beef through the feedlot system that supplies around 70%, it is bound to have issues in terms of the supply. And then with Karen being a leading supplier or the producer of this, and having to have an outbreak in one of their largest, feedlots, that was bound to have issues in terms of their supply, which is why we saw that, the serious spike, in the price. And remember, as I said earlier on, we already had seen an issue in terms of meat prices even earlier on because of the feed prices. And then a perfect storm came through because we had seen those outbreaks, and then again coming across a period when there was already another issue in terms of other meat types, particularly the chicken, which is normally an affordable price. So that is why those factors, the perfect storm, as I was referring it to, that led to all, these the prices that you saw. But it is good that, for now, things look like are going to be, but it's not going to be in one-way thing. It's going to be depending on the factors. We are seeing outbreaks and in recent days. So that's another factor that we're going to be monitoring, and it's going to always, impact this.
No, sure. And things like rain, which would affect feed, the price of feed for cattle, does that ever become a factor? I mean, how bad does the drought have to be before that becomes a factor in the price of beef?
Yeah, I mean, the drought it's always going to be a problem, Stephen. I mean, whether it's drought or otherwise. But what is important is that the issue around the rain is that it positively impacts generally the maize production in South Africa, which is the key component that supplies the feed to the feedlot system and generally animal livestock production. So when we have quite a good year, like the one that we are currently looking into, because we are quite to have a rebound from the previous season, so that is generally a good thing. In terms of the prices, we see going to have normal prices, but not excluding the fact that South Africa is not a bigger player if you are to look into the global space. But then again, even when you're looking in the global space, there's generally enough grains to supply, livestock producers. So therefore, when it comes to that, we are generally fine. But the issue is going to remain around these outbreaks. That because, as I said earlier on, that we have seen quite a significant decline in terms of the slaughter numbers. Meaning, if you are to compare to the previous years, that has a serious implications in terms of how much is available and which products that the consumers want to buy, even though the rain itself does play an important role, especially in terms of the feed that we want to supply for the producers. Otherwise, we can have enough and affordable, feed. But if the supplier, in terms of the slaughter numbers, are not coming through, as it is the case, sometimes because of the limitations and movements and all that, that is always going to have serious implications in terms of the supply and then eventually the price that you're going to be paying for the meat at the end of the day.
In some agricultural commodities, so chicken, for example, highly traded around the world, we produce a lot of our own chicken, and we also import a lot of our own chicken. And I'm not sure we import nearly as much beef. But if we had a long-term foot and mouth outbreak, how long would it take before imports started to come in and started to bring prices down?
So that one, it's going to depend on how much, of the current outbreaks we are seeing in terms of the frequency, Stephen, because we cannot really just, based on the number of the current outbreaks that we're having, just say, Lord, we need to import. Anyway, South Africa does import, beef, but this is mostly in the form of live winners, mostly from Botswana and Namibia, which have always been our supplier of winners. But generally, South Africa does import, few, but we are a net exporter, meaning we produce and we sell more than we buy. So we don't really have an issue there. So therefore, even if we are to see, an issue in terms of these outbreaks, it's going to take a while to see in terms of, do we really need to put brakes, in terms of generally of producing domestically, and then we can say then we're going to rely on buying, outside, because that has serious implications for the sector, because, there's a lot of cost that has to be taken into consideration in the number of people that are employed across these sectors, because of the farmers themselves that currently are holding their livestock into their feedlots, and also to make sure that they're getting their products into the system. But then again, the number of the frequency of these outbreaks we are seeing is going to determine how much we're going to be, even the policies and the decisions that need to be made in relation to those frequencies. And then therefore, that's only when we're going to be able to say maybe the country needs to really consider buying beef outside. But then until then, we're going to be monitoring the outbreaks, which are really an issue as it stands for now.
Thabile Nkunjana, thanks so much. Agricultural Economist, really appreciate the time.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Money Show.
The Africa Business Report.
Dr. Otendo Ndwengi is founding director at Tribe Africa Advisory, author of the book Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded. And good to see you again, Otendo. Thanks so much for coming in. Kigali is spending $100 million on a cable car project. Do we mean, I know it's mountainous in Rwanda. Do we mean a mountain or do we mean like a trolley car?
No, it's actually on the mountainous side, and that's one of the reasons that they've had it. But Rwanda, and again, good evening to you, Stephen, and a good evening to your listeners. Rwanda, always in the forefront from an African perspective, initiatives. If you remember at one time, the drones and the blood, and then also they were in the forefront with VW doing that mobile solution and assembly plant. So they've invested about $100 million in cable cars. And the reason for this, look, the logic is quite simple. They want to decongest traffic as well as obviously go green and also optimize in terms of people traveling. The cable cars are also an attraction from a tourist perspective because remember, there's a lot of mountains and there's a lot of tourism around that. So people moving up and down the mountains, and this is going to be intertwined with regards to the transport system. So it's got a lot of positives around it. They expect to move, Stephen, about 50,000 people through this and reduce the average travel time in the urban areas by 15 minutes, which converts to mobility. So it's a good initiative, and it'll be the first in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think they plan to go live 2026. So it's a great initiative and another positive direction for Rwanda.
Cape Town's going to say we did it first. We all know this is what's going to happen.
Nothing wrong with a bit of competition, Stephen. Nothing wrong with a bit of competition.
Looking at job creation in our sports sector, a big investment of $50 million. It's interesting because if you look at the youth bulge in Africa, you want the African sports audience in the future. You really do. America, sure, but mature markets, you need to come here.
And that's to put a figure to it, the sports market for Africa is a $20 billion industry, and it's growing on average about 2% year on year. So worthwhile investing. The companies that invested in it are, the vehicle is Helio, which is registered in the UK, but is focused in terms of the Africa space. They've received an injection of $50 million from Popraco, which is a subsidiary of a French company, as well as the IFC. So the World Bank is also partnering there. And really, the financing is to help sport IP, event management, infrastructure, and retail and hospitality. And the key four partners, Stephen, that are involved in this initiative are NBA Africa, one of my favorite companies, the Malachite Group, PFL Africa, as well as Zaria. And really, at the end of the day, I think the challenge in Africa, Stephen, is that we've got a lot of talent, we've got a lot of young people. Social media has obviously amplified the capability of Africa. But I think the big challenge, and this goes back to the Multilateral Trade and Finance Bank, African Bank, actually investing in the creative industry through Canix, which is a vehicle that they use to enhance the entertainment industry in Africa. But the big challenge in Africa is how do you convert all that capability, that skill into IP, which not only from an IP perspective, but also into a balance sheet item that can actually be invested in and you can see return on investment. And this is one of the initiatives that this Popraco and IVFC have done through Helio in terms of injecting this capital to actually target key initiatives like this. So it's quite exciting. As I said, a big GDP of $20 billion is the creative industry in Africa. So when you've got investors like this coming to the party, it will definitely make an impact and translate into jobs for the young people like you and me.
Stop it. There's certain things you'd have to do to make this work. So your sporting leagues need to be more professional.
Very true.
The sporting clubs. And I say this quite deliberately. We could start with the PSL sometimes. I mean, we shouldn't have government money to buy a VAL system, and things like that. I mean, you need, and then you can have a proper, I mean, we have an Africa League, but you could, an inter-club thing, but you could have a real kind of, the bottom of the league plays bottom of the league. You could really, I mean, there's so much potential to do it if you run it properly.
No, 100%, Stephen. And I think it has to start from the grassroots and not just from, as I said, the talent is there. You go into the townships, you go into the rural areas, you go into the urban areas, whether it's sports, whether it's cricket, whether it's basketball, whether it's just pure acting. The skill sets are there. The sad part is there's not enough of an ecosystem that is structured, that has got accountability, that goes all the way to the top, so that an internal or external investor, and I'm talking from an Africa perspective, can look at it and say, God, this is an asset that I can actually invest in, and not only invest in, but actually scale. And when you look at social media, you see the talent and the capability, but it's scaling that to the next level so that it becomes a viable business opportunity. So that's why this investment by Helio in conjunction with Propraco and IFC is a step in the right direction, Stephen.
There was a lot of talk about what was happening with Total Energy and Mozambique, and particularly around the situation in Cabo Delgado, the insurgency there. Now it seems that $20 billion liquefied natural gas project is going to continue.
Yeah, so remember, Stephen, I mean, just the history of this project goes back to 2021. Obviously, the Islamic insurgents in Mozambique, it took a bit of a stop. And also the investors, America was involved, the UK was involved. But the big players is Total and the CEO, Patrick Poyan. I hope I say that quite nicely. Recently met, I think it was last week, Thursday, with the president, the newly elected president of Mozambique, President Chapo. And they've more or less said, okay, this project is going to continue. They are confident that the security measures they've put in there will make a big impact. And next year is when they're going to restart everything. That's based on what they've said so far. Why is this so important? Not just from a Mozambique perspective in terms of infrastructure, in terms of job creation, but for the region. LNG plays a significant part in terms of if the infrastructure in the region builds up, it contributes in terms of power and electricity and energy, which is needed in the region. So quite a great initiative. And hopefully this time when it does pick up, that the whole insurgent Islamic problem will have gone away. But I doubt it, Stephen, because those regions are highly volatile. But let's err on the side of caution, and hopefully this thing will take off and be sustainable and grow as expected.
And then Liberia, they've been having a conversation with the US Embassy in Monrovia. This is about the signing of a big deal around power exploration.
Yeah, to put a figure on it, 1.8 billion. And just to look at the players that are involved, I mean, Liberia, obviously based in West Africa and close to Guinea. So you've got two big players in terms of the iron ore mining space there, Stephen. So firstly, you've got Ivanhoe, which is an American company owned by HPX, and they've got mines in Guinea, and they come through rail to Liberia to be exported, obviously, back to the US or to other international markets. But you've also got ArcelorMittal that is also involved. Now, they're using the same railway line. So caring is sharing, or sharing is caring, as the saying goes. But the challenge that is there is that HPX has come and said, look, we want to invest in 1.8 billion in terms of the railway line, and we believe it's going to make, we need it. And HPX, ArcelorMittal is a bit unhappy with that, because they're saying, well, does that mean that there's no longer any future investment in us? So there's a bit of a dispute there. But at the end of the day, it's $1.8 billion of investment. Initially, the deal was supposed to be confirmed. The Liberians are saying, no, the deal is confirmed. The Americans are saying, no, it was just an agreement in terms of expression of interest. Maybe it's the English that is not so clear in regards to this. But Stephen, otherwise...
Took me a minute to get that. Oh, that was a good dig. Yeah, that was a good dig. Liberia, very good.
Hopefully the English is aligned. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if this works out, it gives opportunity in terms of growth and infrastructure in that space.
And very quickly, the Egyptian billionaire Naguib Sawiris spending $100 million. They're going to convert motorbikes to electric power in Morocco.
Yeah.
And I mean, you see more and more electric-driven electric bikes in South Africa. I mean, it's the way forward.
It's $100 million, and it's specifically to drive with regards to the conversion of fossil fuel back to to electrical power. He's injected 100 million. He's a billionaire, obviously, from Egypt. And the idea is this is in line with Morocco's ambition to have 50% of their energy mix by 2030 being renewable energy. And I think currently their average, their grid is standing about 42% in terms of renewable energy. So obviously a key initiative. I think the exciting story for me, Stephen, is that you're looking at an African country, investing in another African country to making a positive impact. And that's the kind of initiative we're trying to sort of relate across the whole of the continent.
Rotendo Ndwingwi, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Dr. Ndwingwi is, of course...
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Is of course the person we speak to for our Africa update every week, the founding director of Tribe Africa Advisory. Just gone 7:30 on The Money Show.
The Money Show.
Personal finance.
Well, Warren Ingram is out this evening. Thabo Holo is the program manager for Old Mutual Financial Education. Thabo, good evening. Good of you to join us tonight, and thanks very much indeed. We're talking about online gambling this evening, and I've been utterly amazed by how quickly this seems to have taken off over the last 3 years. The adverts are everywhere. The gambling industry in South Africa is a turnover. I mean, it's R1 trillion a year. It's incredible when you think about it. And the Amabungani Center for Investigative Journalism has said that virtually all of this money seems to go overseas. It's not making South Africans richer. So, Thabo, how quickly has this sort of happened? It seems to have happened very fast.
Good evening, Stephen, and thanks for the opportunity, and good evening to your listeners. Certainly, if you look at the growth over a very short period, it kind of caught us napping, isn't it? That it grew up so quickly. And outstanding that we're looking at an amount of around R1 trillion. That's an incredible number by any stretch of imagination. So yes, it's quite a big number, and certainly a bit of a worrying phenomenon, if you ask me.
Well, I'm going to come on to that in a moment. What are we gambling on? And we're gambling on sport, right? We're South African.
Oh, yes. As South African, we it seems like sports betting is our choice. If you look at out of the total amount of R1 trillion, over 700 billion went into sports betting. So it would seem like, at least from the findings, that sports betting seemed to be overwhelmingly the betting choice.
There's something quite attractive, isn't it? I'm not on the field with Downs or the Box, but I can sort of, have a stake in whether they win or lose. I mean, I can see the power of that. The idea that you're a part of it. You're not just watching, you're actually playing. You have a much bigger stake in what happens.
Look, certainly it would present some sort of an allure of being part of it, right? And well, for some, it might be harmless fun, just taking a bet or two, right? But it becomes more problematic when it becomes almost like a problematic gambling, where it becomes pathological. So it turns quickly into an addiction. So yes, from a distance, it might look like some fun, but we must be quick to acknowledge that it can also turn into a problem.
How and when does it turn into a problem? I mean, this is always the big question with something like gambling. Once or twice might be fun. It's just entertainment. It's fine. I can lose that money. It doesn't seem to stay like that for so many people.
Not for a lot of people. It certainly doesn't seem to stay like that. And if you look at the text now, is that there's increase in the number of addiction cases, at least in the gambling space, and you're starting to see studies are starting to show an increase, unfortunately, in pathological and problematic gambling. So that in itself is seemingly on the rise and on the increase, unfortunately.
I think for a lot of people, they feel that they can win. And look, the adverts are very glamorous, etc. I mean, it is true that you can win. Isn't that really the problem?
Absolutely. It's not necessarily false that you might win, but it They serve us good to always realize that the house always wins. So yes, the allure might look at, and if you look at the glitz and the glamour that's associated with the advertising around. If you around townships, for instance, you see the amount of advertising billboards that have gone up, the number of outlets that have gone up. It might give you a sense of you might actually win. And I'm not saying you will definitely not win, but it would serve us good to always remember that the house always wins. It might seem innocent, but ultimately, in a long run, it might not necessarily work in your favor.
How does the house always win? Is it true that the odds are stacked against you? I mean, there must be maths behind that to say it one way or another.
I think common sense, Stephen, will suggest to me that Mr. Grootes will not build such a big empire just to make Hollow rich. I doubt if that's the business model of most people that put up some money in terms of gambling. So all the odds are definitely stacked against the punters and the gamblers. Unfortunately, we don't realize that because the allure of winning is always there. And unfortunately, that's what draws us in. And the hope that one day I'll be that guy that gets that million. And it always draws me in. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that.
So if you had to gamble a lot of the time, and some people do, you will win some, you will lose some, but over time you're saying the house will always win more than you do. You're always going to end up having put money in.
Absolutely. Over a longer period, you always be the one that ends up losing. We've seen that in programs like, for instance, I Blew It, where people will come across a massive windfall, and in a short space of time, they will lose that money. So if you look at overall in the longer period, the odds are definitely stacked against any gambler. The chances of you going out at least above the house are that much slimmer. Even if the odds, whether you take it even in a space of a lottery, for instance, the odds of you winning are that stacked against you. So the chances of an ordinary person making it out, for instance, we know that some of the people are gambling to cover the debts or even cover some of the expenses. Over a longer period, you end up in more debt and not being able to cover those expenses and ending up in more problematic situation that you work in.
I'm amazed that people are gambling to sort of pay debt. And what this also shows us is that they have no other way of doing it. If they were able to have a sustainable source of income, a sustainable job or two, then maybe they wouldn't be doing this. But this is suggesting that, in fact, maybe even gambling is taking advantage here. There is no other way for people to make money.
Surely there's other alternatives. There should be other alternatives, Stephen. Yes, I'll be the first one to acknowledge that the rising cost of living can put some pressure on the pocket. Certainly there are other economic pressures that people experience. And we in a cycle of high unemployment in some instances. Yes, it might look bleak. But let's take a second and ask ourselves if gambling is the only way out. Shouldn't we be exploring other ways, exploiting our talents and living within our means? Perhaps looking at other ways other than gambling to get ourselves or to dig ourselves out of the situation. I'm not ignorant to the extent that says we don't feel that much economic pressure. Yes, we do, but I'm not sure if gambling is the way out of it.
No, sure. Who's actually doing the gambling? Is it older people, younger people, richer people, poorer people? Who's actually doing this? And now that it's online, it's so easy to do. So gambling's become, if you look at sort of old James Bond movies, right? Gambling was something done in a casino by old European people in Europe, dressed in tuxedos and ball gowns. And
probably tuxedos, cigars and cognac in hand. Unfortunately, what we're seeing, the rising demographic is it's a young African male. And you could associate that perhaps with access to technology such as mobile phone, which makes it easier for people to then go into online gambling, which is a problematic bit, because these are the people that are supposed to be the backbone of the economy, at least of family structures. But if they themselves are going into gambling, that says very bleak future ahead.
Why is it men so much? Is it because of the connection with sport? Is there some other reason?
There's many reasons, Stephen. It's not just the issue of sports, but there's psychological issues. Maybe a seek of a thrill-seeking behaviors, social pressures, and in many instances, the attraction to things like advertising and promotion. Early exposure is one of those. So there's a myriad of reasons why people tend to gravitate into gambling. And again, I must be the first one to point out that some might see it as a harmless fun, right? But it becomes problematic where it becomes pathological, where people cannot do without, where people will wake up in the middle of the night just so that they can gamble just to stay on. So there's no one thing in terms of that particular demographic, and in general, there's multiple layers to it. But most importantly is the mental health that is associated with that, which is becoming more and, at least according to the studies, more and more problematic.
I mean, the stress of it must just be terrible, and that leads then push you into kind of more stress and more kind of need for that thrill. And they see gambling sometimes almost as a release because you get that thrill. You're thinking of something exciting that could happen.
Certainly, which is the unfortunate part of it. That the more you get sucked into it. So yes, there's definite mental health issues. There's also psychological thrill-seeking kind of behaviors. But do not forget, all of that thrill-seeking behavior has an impact on family structures. It has an impact on our personal finances. The next thing, it will have an impact on our employment structure status, because we might be using that little money that takes us to work to then push it into gambling. It might affect other elements that have to do with how we conduct ourselves in terms of personal finances. It's beyond just gambling. It has an impact definitely on other matters other than finances.
It's easy to sit in a studio presenting a show called The Money Show and be slightly dismissive of online gambling. If I were representing the online gambling companies, and I'm not, I would say, well, Stephen, you talk about share prices all the time. You talk about how much money went into Bitcoin or went into gold or went into Nvidia or whatever it is, and people lose money there too. And isn't that the same thing? Is there a difference?
I would argue that there is a difference, Stephen, in a sense that at least my little understanding of investing, for instance, there's science behind it. You don't just wake up and just throw the coin in the air and hope it will stick. There's a whole lot of science that goes beyond that, including investing as an individual. When you choose which vehicle to invest in or where to save your money, there's a bit of science that goes beyond it. I doubt if there's that much science that goes into gambling, really, because if you look at it, you're betting against the odds. What are the odds of you losing? And if you look at generally in terms of philosophy in investing, over a longer period, you will still make your money. But I doubt if you can apply the same in terms of gambling. So certainly, I don't see the likeness between investing in, for instance, the stock exchange, etc., and gambling. Yes, you might argue that you might lose money in terms of investing. Yes, there is that chance. But I would argue that you have a greater chance of losing money if you go in the gambling route than investing. Certainly, that's how I see it.
So I mean, if there is a big difference, I suppose the other thing is that when it comes to investing, you often win. You usually win, in fact. You're not betting against the house, you're betting against the market, and the market tends to rise over time, or does rise over time. It's really only in gambling that you lose all the time over the longer run.
Absolutely. And perhaps that should be the focus, is how to teach people how to invest instead of pushing people into gambling, how to live within our means, how to manage our finances better. Perhaps we should invest more in awareness in terms of risky behavior such as gambling. I understand that there's people that invest in that. I get it, and I get it that there's companies that are pushing billions. But my side is on the consumer. That I would rather they err on the side of caution and look into investment and prudent investment rather than pushing themselves into gambling.
We're speaking to Thabo Holo tonight in Personal Finance, Program Manager for Old Mutual Financial Education. The issues that we're seeing in the personal finance space with online gambling. You with The Money Show, it's 10 minutes to 8.
The Money Show. Personal Finance.
Thabo Holo is the Program Manager for Old Mutual Financial Education, talking about online gambling tonight. Warren Ingram back with us soon. Thabo, so one of the things about gambling online is that it's very gamified. It's like playing a game. It's exactly like playing a game. It's like the games my son plays, on his phone. You sort of hear beep and shooting and things like that. And yet here there's money involved. So it's quite hard to sort of think, well, I'm playing games and yet I have a gambling problem. There's a kind of disassociation perhaps.
And that's the sad part, because if you look at it, and even at the design of it, and perhaps it's designed that way just to keep us in there. And you're absolutely correct. It looks like harmless fun. It looks like harmless gaming. But what you're not seeing is beyond just that harmless gaming effect is the damage that it causes in terms of the addiction part, just to keep you on that app, to keep you on that website or on that platform. And absolutely you're right. It looks like harmless gaming that anybody can pick up. And I suppose that's the art behind it, just to keep you on that. But what we don't realize is the more time you spend on that, the more you lose. And that's certainly the sad part, I suppose. It looks so easy. And I suppose for all intents and purposes, it was designed that way. It's designed just to make it easier for you to stay on, to get kept in there. And that's the sad part of the driver behind the addiction in terms of that online gambling.
How do you know when you have a problem? I mean, at what point do you have to say to yourself, actually, I have a problem, or someone has a problem?
There's definitely pointers, Stephen. Number one is generally you would live within a particular limit in terms of your budgeting. You know that you have money for transport, you have money for this, money for that. But once you go beyond just money for entertainment and now tapping into things like now you have to default on rent, you have to default on your mortgage bond just to feed your gambling habit, then you know that you have a problem. The second bit is when you start hiding and lying. That's another sure way of saying I have a problem. When you can't and you go beyond just having fun on those platforms or in those establishments, then you know that you have a problem. In some instances, when you start having quarrels inside the family because of your the nature of your habit, then you know you have a problem. And I would wish that even the people that are around us who might pick it up before you as a gambler picked it up, we should notify you and say, hey, Thabo, we start seeing some sense of change in you, which is not pleasant. Then we can notify you in terms of your problem gambling.
And when someone else is having a problem, I mean, you'll notice money perhaps draining, but it's quite hard to confront someone and say, I think you have a problem and it's related to addiction. Sheesh, it's a big thing. And addiction and money, very dangerous combination and a big thing to accuse someone of.
I think it's addiction in general. Even those that are addicted to things like alcohol, for instance, it might not necessarily be easy to confront somebody and say, I think you have a problem. Or even to say, I think we have a problem. Similarly with money, and especially with money, it might not necessarily be a pleasant conversation. And money in general is not necessarily a pleasant conversation. So I will be the first one to acknowledge that perhaps that's where you need external help. That's where you need help from counselors, from other institutions to say, hey, I might be having a problem. Even before you say, definitely I have a problem. But once you start picking up certain patterns in terms of behavior, certain behaviors that are antisocial in their very nature, perhaps it's time to then start having those conversations that are not comfortable, but necessary.
Do we need to maybe have conversations in our homes about online gambling before people get into it? The online gambling industry won't thank me for saying this, but basically to say to people, look, these are the dangers of it. And I mean, look, this is easy for me to say. I've never been someone interested in gambling. I know people who are exactly like me, but they just enjoy it. I'm not like that. It's, some people do this, some people do that. But I do wonder if really the message needs to be that actually, if you're going to do this, put aside a budget. It's part of your entertainment budget. Is it really, and just know that you're probably going to lose it.
I would advocate strongly for that. If you have a separate entertainment budget, make that part of your and stick to it. Not just put up the money and when it's done, you tap into other sources. Stick to that budget. And yes, absolutely, it should be a conversation that we're having at home. But beyond that, even as providers, for instance, financial services, technology providers, we should also drive the message of awareness of the risks associated with gambling. It might not necessarily be up to the gambling houses only. Now we're using technology. Surely there's an opportunity for technology providers to say, hey, be aware of this. Because the risk, in my view, far outweighs the benefits. So from whether it's financial services in terms of the accounts that people use to gamble, or the technological platforms, surely it's incumbent on us, just from a societal point of view, to at least push those messages of awareness in terms of the dangers of gambling. So yes, certainly in terms of conversations at home in the households, but certainly from regulators, also from technology providers, from financial services, it's in our best interest to start pushing the messages of awareness in terms of the risks associated with gambling.
Thabo, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Thabo Holo is the program manager for Old Mutual Financial Education. Some of the risks, the concerns around online gambling. And of course, there's so much to talk about. I can't help but feel that this is a conversation that we will be having again. I think there'll be a lot more to come in the online gambling space. Anyway, really enjoyed that. Thabo, thank you.